Hi everyone, welcome to Deanna and the Written Words. Today I'm back with a language video to give you some tips that you can use to learn a foreign language. So as it is obvious, I'm not an English native speaker, but I do want to say that I have been quite lucky in my life that the languages that I know I've learned kind of due to natural circumstances rather than me just going out there and learning foreign languages just because. So the tips that I'm going to give you are things that I've seen around that I think work. I've seen them work. But at the same time, I want to give you a full disclosure that I haven't had the worst of times when it comes to learning a foreign language. Um, I thought of this video because, it was always in my mind that part of this channel was going to be about languages in general, so maybe linguistics as well, compared linguistics, but also foreign languages. And so this is one of the most immediate videos that come to mind to just explain how you can learn a foreign language. And that's how it came about. I'm following a channel also that is called Polyglot Gathering. I don't know why, but that's very difficult for me to pronounce. And I've only followed them for like a month or so. But I saw a video that really made me think of doing my own thing. That was 10 things that polyglots do differently. Okay, so I'll link it up here and down below as well. You can have a look. That video is much more comprehensive. So in this video today, I'm only going to give you a few glimpses of what that one talks about and how I've come about doing those things that polyglots apparently do differently. But the main premise of the video, and something that I've noticed as well, is how there is a disconnect between what people learn formally or traditionally in schools and in language courses and what people actually learn. So I haven't had the pleasure to come across anyone that has become really fluent in a language just by going to lessons. Yet a lot of people seem to think that that's the way to go. You just go to lessons and sit there mostly passively. You just do the exercises that your teacher prescribes you, and then you learn the language. And both in the video from Polyglot Gathering and myself, I don't think that's enough or that's even the way to approach it. So I'm not saying don't go to language courses, but I'm saying that's not the full picture at all if you really want to learn a language. And I hope to provide you with some tools that you can use. The overarching idea of the video from Polyglot Gathering is that you need to come up with your own ways that you can use to learn more effectively. So there's a lot of introspection and to figure out what works for you. But that might be a bit daunting if you've never tried to learn a foreign language or something complex by that matter. So even though that's really helpful to really keep in mind that you need to find your own ways, your own materials, your own approach to learning a new language. If you've never gone through the process, you might not know where to start. And this is why I'm giving you a few more specific tips today. So, number one, keep a vocab list or some kind of list of things to learn. So instead of just going to a language book and reading it from A to Z, it is more helpful to do your own lists of the things that you need to learn in particular. My partner uses an app that uses flashcards, but that he creates himself. So he puts in there the words that he doesn't know and wants to learn, and he has the translation English and Spanish. Forgot to mention, but he is learning Spanish. And I think he's done really, really well with that. He just keeps using them, and the flashcards come more often when he gets the right answer, so the right translation to the word, and less often when he's learned them. But also, he's got the traditional way, which I'm going to show you here. He's got this little notebook, and he jots down the words in Spanish and in English. And then every 6 months, a year, depending on how many words have come and how many words he's learned in that period of time, he would take a new notebook and do it from scratch, but only copying the words that he hasn't learned yet or that he feels he needs a bit more reminders to properly learn. And that's one of the strategies that the other video that I keep referring to talks about, is just list of vocab that you keep distilling to take out what you already learned and to put new words in. So I thought that was quite interesting because David just happened to come with his own idea, which already existed out there. I personally have a slightly different approach for French, which I speak, but I want to relearn, sort of, which is an address book. So my approach is maybe more formal. It's more like a dictionary that I'm creating. So in every letter, I put the words that I want to remind myself about or that I want to learn from scratch. Um, and sometimes it's just because of their spelling, sometimes it's the meaning that I don't understand, or some new meanings that I've learned from a word that I already knew. So there's a bit of everything in here, but it's in alphabetic order. So this is not for me to review the whole thing like David does, but it is more to refer back to it when I need to. Number two is to reread, rewatch things that you've watched in your native language. This is quite a common one, but I just wanted to reinforce that I do think that works. I've used it myself. So find material that you're familiar with and watch it or read it or listen to it in the language you want to learn. And of course, you can help yourself by using subtitles in your native language or subtitles in the language you want to learn. There's a lot of degrees of difficulty that you can implement into this approach as well. So you can start with something really, really short. For example, I listen to a lot of podcasts of things that I wasn't familiar with that particular material, but I was familiar with the content, right? So if it's something you really know about, then there's less of a difficulty understanding the vocab, understanding what the concepts are that are being explained. And that really helped me when I first came to England because I was doing a master's in microbiology and I already knew what the things that we talked about were. I was already familiar with the material basically when I got to lessons. So I already, when there were gaps in my understanding, I would probably have, I was probably I was probably able to fill them with what I already knew. Um, a book that I've read in multiple languages is The Little Prince. It's very simple. It's got a bit of vocab though, and it's been translated in so many languages that you can probably find a version in whichever language you want to learn. You can even find one if you're in your native language, one in the language you want to learn. So there will be a bit of translating in your process there, but that could also be helpful. Number three, use the language, use the language, use the language. Again, I think some people wait to get a lot of input before they start producing it, but they eventually do, and then they would learn the language itself. So either you can choose to start using the language, and by that I mean writing and speaking, or earlier in your process or later on, but you have to make an effort. And I know this is difficult, I know it firsthand that it's difficult, but you have to make an effort to eventually produce it yourself. And to not just focus on the grammar and the things in books, but actually go out there and use it. I would say for that, one optimistic message to give you if you want to learn a foreign language, and especially if you're struggling to learn a foreign language, is that remember that languages are a human construction, and therefore, as humans, our brains are capable of learning them. So if you keep that in mind, sometimes it feels like languages are unnecessarily complex because they have evolved through time, and the elements of the language don't always make sense. I mean, spelling in English or pronouncing in English doesn't always make sense at first glance. But an English baby will grow up to speak English, so why wouldn't I be able to? And I know that brains have different capacities for learning languages when you're a baby and when you grow older, but ultimately it is a human construction, so we can understand it as humans. Number four, practice eloquence and pronouncing. Um, Okay, this is a weird one that I don't usually hear about, but it helped me a lot in English. So maybe that's not for at the very beginning of learning a language, but midway, when you feel like you can communicate, but you feel very sketchy, it takes a long time to produce a sentence that you're happy about. Um, and I wouldn't say I've gone past that. I still feel that very much with my English, but I've got better. What I mean by eloquence is to learn to pronounce things in a normal pace without having to stop in every word, thinking of what you are going to say or how you're saying it or the grammar of the language, just trying to go past that and just practice the work that your mouth is doing, which can be very different between languages. I know that in English, I pronounce things more in the front of my mouth, whereas in Spanish, there's a lot more sounds that I pronounce in the back, and when I go to French, it's even more at the forefront. So your mouth has to get used to pronouncing those things, and it's not always obvious, but you can use material that you already have in order to get better at eloquence. So, in particular, I try to say things with the same pace when listening to a podcast or a video, and also with some songs, trying to sing the song as fast as the song actually does it. So, obviously, in here as well, you find a huge range of difficulties, and you can find one that kind of tackles what you want to learn with your level. My number 5. Okay, this is one that you hear a lot about when hearing about learning new languages. It's what to use translation for. So some people say that you shouldn't translate anything. You should just go, say to the country that speaks that language, and you should be completely immersed and never think of how things translate into your native language ever. Some other people use translation 100%. So anything they learn, say with the flashcards that I was talking about earlier, it's this is the word in English, this is the word in the language I want to learn, and this is how they compare, just word by word. I would say I'm kind of in the middle. I don't think one word always translates to one word. You probably know that if you've ever got into languages. But when I see David using some words in Spanish, and I'm like, that doesn't fit in this context. And then we realize that that's because he's got it in his vocab book, and we need to rearrange the way that he's explained it to himself, because some words can have hundreds of different meanings and they don't always align, right? So, what's my approach? My approach is use translation when necessary if things are going to be easier by using translation. In particular, we use it a lot when it comes to grammar to try and compare how things work and to try and do literal translation, right? So to try and give a meaning to every particle of a sentence in a way that makes sense. We first translate it directly into English, so with the word as it is, with the word order as it is in Spanish, and we then translate it as it would be in English with, normal speaking English. I don't think it's helpful for me, though, to translate absolutely everything, because at the end of the day, you want to get used to a new complex system of symbols and meanings. And so you want to internalize that kind of structure that comes with the language. As soon as you can shed that habit of translating everything, I think that is positive as well, to actually get rid of that and as I say, starting to construct the language as it is rather than translating it in your head or using translation to understand everything. Number 6 is don't forget your goal. A lot of people that I hear are learning a foreign language just want to learn a foreign language and they don't have more specific goals. But I find that if you think about it, you probably do have more specific goals. For example, my mom is learning English and has been learning English for as long as I can remember now. But her aim, really, she doesn't want to find a job in an English speaking country. She's been retired for a while. I don't think her main goal is to communicate academic messages in English either. She just wants English so that when she comes to visit me, she can talk to people and she can buy something from a restaurant without much trouble. And she probably wants it as well so that she can communicate with future grandchildren. Okay, but that's a whole can of worms that we're not going to get to today. So you would think that she would focus on spoken English and on simple vocab that she can use and understand from other people. Maybe she should focus as well on understanding accents around where I live or around England. But no. She goes full on into the grammar because that's what she's comfortable with. She's a good student. She can write things down and understand the grammar and do all the exercises and do them well. And then when she's speaking, she forgets to use the S in third person, okay? She forgets to use the present simple and she's instead trying to use some weird conditional form that she doesn't fully master. So I've told her off so many times for that. Just remember what your goal is. If you want English for studying, then maybe you need to focus on whichever vocab you feel the study is. If you want English to understand pop culture, then maybe just listen to pop culture, watch your films, your TV shows, the things that you're familiar with, and get to know the way that people talk in pop culture and the vocab that they use. So, don't forget your goal. It's very easy to get drawn into this sense of scholarship and just do the exam and pass it and be very proud of yourself. And then you go to the country and you can't ask for, where the bus stop is, whatever. And number 7, and that's something that's really touched on by that video that I keep referring to, it's make it fun. So make it yours and make it fun and make sure that the materials that you gather in order to learn are fun to you, are interesting. It's something that you're interested about outside of your language learning process. So you want to know or you like listening about, they give the example of traveling. So if you're interested in traveling, then you want to be listening to podcasts and watching videos and films and documentaries and whatever it is that you do to learn about traveling. You will become more familiar about the things that you care about. You will be more motivated about learning your language. It will become a tool to learn more about the things you're interested in rather than a goal in itself because, we don't really want to learn a language in order to be in a closed box talking that language without anyone listening or interacting with us. We want to learn a language so that we can use it outside, so that we can make connections with people, so that we can access materials. So therefore, do that to learn it. And I finally have one that's not really a point, is a question mark. And I'd be very interested in knowing if anyone has used that to actually learn a language. And that is, would it be helpful to learn a language like a kid does? So let me rephrase that. When kids learn their native language, they learn by listening a lot when they're babies, and then they start producing it whenever they can, right? They don't learn to read and write until they're at least a few years older. I know that differs a lot between countries. In Spain, I'd say we learn to read and write when we're about 5. In Scandinavia, I've heard that's much later, and that doesn't really impair anything later on in life, by the way, which is very interesting. But my point here is that if I had learned English by just listening to people speaking in English, I would have probably not have that much trouble imitating or trying to, trying to get closer to the accent of native speakers. Let me make another point, branching out from that. I don't aim to sound like an English person. And I don't think that's necessary. I just think that by kind of approaching what a native person sounds like, it's 1, easier to pronounce often, and 2, easier for other people to understand you, but you don't have to really go all the way. And I know that people try to change their accents or to look like they're from a place that they're not. I don't really understand that or share that view. Um, but anyway, going back to what I was saying, a kid wouldn't learn the writing and the grammar until they're much older and they have already really internalized some of that just from seeing it on the background. So I think it would have been helpful for me to learn how things are pronounced and then to learn how things are written. Because sometimes, or I would say many times, Spanish speakers learn how things are written and then we try to pronounce it. And so when you have seen something written many times, but you haven't heard it that much, you try and pronounce it with the tools that you know from your native language. And that can be a problem. And I've seen that happen a lot from Spanish speakers speaking in English. They just pronounce things not like they are pronounced in English, but like they think they are pronounced based on how it's written. So I wonder if by not seeing anything written at first and getting fluent enough to learn to pronounce things and then seeing them written, if that would lead to much better pronunciation. Um, I don't know if that would lead to worse spelling. That is possible. And obviously, if that's one of your goals, then you probably don't want to do that. If your main goal is to learn in a written form, like for studying, for example, then you probably want to spell better than you can pronounce. But that's just a guess on one thing that could help pronunciation. So if that's your goal, you might want to try it. I don't know. Let me know if you've tried it. And I would like to see in the comments what people have tried that hasn't worked and what people have tried that has worked. And as we keep saying, that's a very personal thing. So it might not work for you, might work for other people, but there seem to be overarching things that don't tend to work. I have never heard someone saying, I get into the grammar and I learn all the grammatic structures and I get fluent that way. So that's one thing that I'd be interested in knowing. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it's in some way helpful. Make sure you check the Polyglot Gathering channel. It's very interesting if you are into languages. And I'll see you next time.